8. Brutal Stoic principles that turn weak minds into steel. This isn't motivation, and it isn't here to make you feel better for a moment. This is mental training, quiet, honest, and uncomfortable in the way that truly matters. And if you're here, listening right now, something inside you already knows it's time to stop avoiding what makes you stronger. Part 1. There are mornings when you wake up and your body doesn't hurt. You're not sick. There's no clear reason to be tired. And yet, inside, there's a strange emptiness. I lived through mornings like that for a long time. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from working too hard, but a different kind, quieter, more dangerous. Tired from no longer knowing where I was going. Tired because everything around me became more convenient, easier, while I was slowly getting weaker without realizing it. I still worked, still talked, still smiled, but there was a very clear feeling inside that something was leaving me. No noise, no drama, just willpower thinning out, discipline softening, and a mind slowly getting used to avoidance. We don't collapse in one big moment. We collapse through very small choices. One delay because I'm tired today. One more scroll instead of sitting with silence. One choice of comfort instead of doing what needs to be done. And then we wonder why we feel weak, why motivation is gone, why life feels like someone else is holding the steering wheel. The truth is, no one takes your strength from you. You give it away, piece by piece, in exchange for short-term comfort. I used to think I lacked motivation. Later, I understood the problem was never motivation. The problem was that I had grown used to living in a world designed to keep me from feeling discomfort. When there is no friction, no challenge, no moments that force you to stand firm, the mind begins to rust. You don't notice it right away. It's like steel left unused for too long. On the outside, it looks intact, but inside, it has weakened. And one day, even a small pressure is enough to make it break. We are taught to avoid pain, avoid difficulty, avoid tension, but no one tells us the cost of that avoidance. The cost is a mind that can no longer carry pressure, a spirit easily shaken by other people's words, a quiet sense of anxiety even when life looks fine on paper. And the most dangerous part is that you start to believe this state is normal, that everyone feels this way, that getting a little weaker doesn't matter. But deep down, you know something is wrong. You know you were once stronger than this, sharper, more present. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because I've been there. I know what it's like to look in the mirror and see someone who isn't exactly a failure, but isn't really themselves anymore. Someone safe, but no longer alive. And if you're hearing these words, there's a good chance some part of you is nodding, even if you don't want to admit it. Not because you're weak, but because you've never been trained. There's a huge difference between being wounded and being trained. The modern world blurs that line. And rebended, they're solden rulers and amended on. They're we common fland with previer. They're willed now. They're previer's world, and their will doing. Their people subscribe down into the fitty. Any discomfort is labeled bad. Any pressure is called toxic. But without pressure, without friction, without moments that force you to stand when you don't want to, the mind softens. And a soft mind, even wrapped in comfort, is still easy to break. Pause here for a moment. Don't do anything. Just stop. Breathe in lightly, slowly, deeply, and breathe out. Don't analyze. Don't analyze. We am. Just notice that if you feel tired, empty, or weaker without knowing why, maybe the problem isn't that you lack something. Maybe it's that you've been avoiding for too long. And what you're about to hear next is not comfort. It's another truth, one that has existed for thousands of years, spoken by people who lived through war, plague, betrayal, and loss, and still remained steady from within. And from there, everything begins to change. Part 2. Shared realization. When the truth begins to surface. If you're still here after those words, it tells me something. A part of you is no longer looking for comfort. It's looking for truth. And the first truth that needs to be spoken, gently but directly, is this. The weakened state we just touched is not entirely your fault. You weren't born with a fragile mind. You're not lacking discipline or strength the way you may blame yourself. You simply grew up in an era where everything around you was designed to help you avoid. Avoid pain. Avoid difficulty. Avoid even facing yourself when an entire society whispers, "Don't do anything that makes you uncomfortable." Your softening isn't a personal failure. It's a consequence. But here's the crucial point one very few people dare to say out loud. Understanding the cause does not give you permission to stay there. There is a thin line between compassion and indulgence. Stoicism stands exactly on that line. It does not deny circumstances, but it also doesn't let you hide inside them. It looks straight at reality and says, no matter how the world is built, your mind is still your responsibility. The ancient Stoics didn't write philosophy in quiet rooms with warm coffee and safe lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Meditations while ruling Rome, in the middle of endless wars, plagues that killed millions, and betrayals from within his own court." Seneca spoke about moderation and calm while living in a society driven by ambition, rivalry, and fear, where power could disappear overnight. Epictetus, who spoke most clearly about inner freedom, was once a slave, beaten, stripped of all external control. They weren't talking about strength from books. They were talking about the strength required not to break when life refuses to be gentle. What keeps Stoicism alive isn't that it's beautiful. It's that it's real. It doesn't promise you'll always feel good. It promises you'll stand firm. It doesn't try to make life easier. It teaches you to become solid enough, not to be crushed by what you can't control. And when you look back at their lives, you begin to see something different from what we're usually told. Mental strength doesn't come from being protected from hardship. It comes from being trained within hardship, deliberately, by choice. That's why their words still reach us today, in a world full of comfort but lacking stability. Because deep down, we all know we're living below our true capacity, not from lack of talent, but because the mind has grown used to avoidance. And Stoicism doesn't come to shame you for that. It comes holding up a mirror so you can see where you are and, more importantly, who you could become. This is the turning point of the story. From here on, we stop talking about fatigue and emptiness. We begin talking about retraining the mind, not with slogans, not with empty motivation, but with principles that are hard, real, sometimes uncomfortable to hear, and tested across centuries of human chaos. 8 Stoic principles. Not to make you feel strong, but to make you strong. And the first principle begins exactly where most people spend their lives avoiding: discomfort. Part 3. Gentle, Stoic tools. 8 brutal principles that forge the mind into steel. By the time you reach this point, the question is no longer, why do I feel weak? It becomes something quieter, but more serious. How do I retrain myself? Stoicism doesn't answer that with abstract theory. It answers with principles that are concrete, grounded, sometimes rough. But if practiced long enough, they reshape your inner structure. The first principle sounds paradoxical, but it is the foundation of everything. Principle 1. Embrace discomfort. The painful truth is, no strong mind is born from prolonged comfort. Every time you avoid a small discomfort, you're not just avoiding a feeling, you're training yourself to become weaker. We're taught to see discomfort as a sign of error, but to the Stoics, discomfort is a sign you're standing exactly where growth happens. I saw this clearly in small moments. Standing in front of a cold shower and finding reasons to delay, or avoiding a difficult conversation because silence felt easier than honesty. It wasn't the cold water that made me stronger, and the conversation didn't fix everything overnight. It was the moment I didn't run. Marcus Aurelius said the obstacle in the path becomes the path. That isn't poetry. It's instruction. Each time something makes you want to step back, ask yourself, what if this is the training? The application is simple every day. Choose one thing you don't want to do but know you should, and do it without negotiation. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be consistent. And when you do this, something strange returns self-respect. Principle 2. Don't be owned by your emotions. The uncomfortable truth is, most of us aren't living, we're reacting. One negative comment ruins an entire day. One careless driver carries your anger home with you. Not because these things are big, but because you handed control of your emotional state to the outside world. Epictetus said, anyone who can make you angry is your master. I saw this in myself in very small moments, when a single sentence threw me off balance more than it should have. Stoicism doesn't ask you to have no emotions. It asks you to create a small gap between emotion and action. Response is always stronger than reaction. The practice is simple. When triggered, don't speak immediately. Take a breath. Name the emotion. Ask whether this reaction serves the person you're trying to become. That small pause is where strength begins. And when you're no longer pulled by every emotional wave, you become stable, and stability is a rare form of power in this world. Principle 3. Stop expecting fairness. One of the most painful illusions is the belief that if you do the right thing, life will treat you fairly. In reality, you can do everything right and still lose. Love sincerely and still be left. Work hard and still be overlooked. If you cling to fairness, you live with quiet resentment. The Stoics didn't deny that pain, but they didn't stay there. Marcus Aurelius understood injustice deeply, and he didn't waste time complaining about it. He focused on one thing, his response. Radical responsibility doesn't mean everything is your fault. It means every next step is your choice. The application is this. Whenever you feel the urge to say, "This isn't fair," replace it with, "What will I do with this?" That question moves you from victim to actor. And in that shift, bitterness loses its grip and strength begins to form. Principle 4. Focus on what you can control. Most human anxiety comes from trying to control what was never ours: outcomes, other people's thoughts, the future. These things drain your energy without giving anything back. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, the clear line between what belongs to you and what doesn't. I wasted years worrying about how I was perceived and how things would turn out, until I realized I was neglecting the only thing I truly controlled: my actions right now. The practice is direct when stressed. Ask whether this is within your control. If it is, act. If it isn't, release it. It sounds simple, but practiced consistently, it brings a deep relief, as if you're laying down a weight that was never yours to carry. Pause here. Breathe in gently. Breathe out. Notice how much you've been holding that never belonged to you. Principle 5. Voluntary hardship. After releasing what you can't control, Stoicism brings you back to an active choice, choosing hardship on purpose. Seneca, a wealthy man, deliberately lived simply for periods of time, eating modest food and asking himself, "Is this what I feared?" The point wasn't self-punishment. It was training the mind not to panic when comfort disappears. Skipping a meal, refusing convenience, staying with discomfort instead of escaping it reminds you that you are stronger than your impulses. The application doesn't need to be extreme. Choose one comfort you rely on and step away from it temporarily. You'll discover something freeing: you're not as fragile as you thought. Principle 6. Detach from outcomes. We're taught to cling to results, but Stoicism teaches the opposite. Love the process. When you work for applause, every silence breaks you. When you act for the quality of the act itself, you're free. Epictetus said, "Freedom begins when you stop tying your happiness to what you don't control." I went through seasons of effort without the results I wanted, and it was only when I loosened my grip that my work improved. The practice is asking daily, did I show up with the highest quality I could today, regardless of outcome? When you do this, you become resilient, and resilience always wins long term. Principle 7. Remember death. It sounds heavy, but this principle makes life more vivid, not darker. We delay, stay in relationships that no longer fit, repeat empty days because we assume there's plenty of time. Memento mori. Remember you will die not to frighten you, but to wake you up. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could leave life at any moment. When that truth settles in, you speak more honestly, live more simply, and stop wasting energy on what no longer matters. The practice is simple when you say, tomorrow, ask whether you'd still delay if time were short. That question cuts through a lot of noise. Principle 8. Live for virtue, not approval. This principle ties everything together. Living for virtue means doing what's right when no one is watching, keeping your word when no one is checking, choosing values over image. Marcus Aurelius said to do what is right, the rest doesn't matter. In a world obsessed with exposure and judgment, living by inner standards creates an identity that cannot be taken from you. The practice is invisible. It lives in small, repeated choices where you become the person you respect, not the one who gets the most applause. And when you live that way long enough, you stop searching for strength. It has already been forged within you. These 8 principles don't promise an easier life, but if you let them shape how you think and act daily, you'll notice something different. You're no longer tossed around by circumstances. You stop reacting from old patterns. You stand steadier, calmer, stronger quietly. And from that place, the final part of the story begins, where strength is no longer tension, but a deep peace rooted in living true to yourself. Part 4. Stillness and self-forgiveness, where strength returns to quiet. If you've walked with me this far, there's something important I want you to hear before we continue. You don't need to be strong right now. You don't need to turn yourself into cold steel after one video. What you need, in this moment, is to return to who you really are. Not who you perform as, not who you think you should be, but the person who is here, breathing, listening, brave enough to face themselves. At its deepest level, Stoicism isn't about hardening against life. It's about radical honesty with your inner reality. And real strength always begins there. Many people carry an invisible pressure when they begin training their minds, the pressure to be stronger, more disciplined, never weak again. But if you carry that pressure forward, you simply replace one form of avoidance with another. Stoicism doesn't ask you to deny exhaustion. It asks you to look at it without judgment. You don't need to say, I must be strong. Just admit, this is where I am. And paradoxically, that honesty creates a quiet steadiness, not loud, not performative, but real. From that honesty comes a difficult but necessary step: forgiving yourself. Not the shallow kind of forgiveness meant to move on quickly, but forgiveness rooted in understanding. Forgiving yourself for avoiding difficulty in the past, not because you were weak, but because you weren't taught how to face it. Forgiving yourself for being fragile when you could have been stronger. Not because you were useless, but because your mind had never been trained. Forgiving yourself for choosing ease for too long, because the world around you constantly told you comfort was the goal. You didn't know the cost of that comfort was inner strength, and you can't blame yourself for not knowing what no one showed you. Many people punish themselves silently. They don't say it out loud, but they live with a voice that repeats, I should have done better. I shouldn't be like this. Stoicism doesn't encourage that self-cruelty. It doesn't make you stronger, it just makes you tired. Strength comes from looking at the past clearly, without resentment or denial, and saying one simple sentence. At that time, I did the best I could with the awareness I had. That sentence doesn't weaken you. It frees energy so real training can begin today. This is where we redefine strength. Because you may still associate it with hardness, numbness, never wavering. That isn't Stoic strength. Stoic strength isn't never falling, it's returning to balance faster each time you fall. It's facing fear, fatigue, and doubt without letting them define you. You're just untrained. That isn't cheap comfort. It's precise truth. No one is born knowing how to train the mind. It's a skill, and any skill can be learned. If you're patient and kind with yourself along the way, pause here a little longer. Don't think about the 8 principles. Don't plan what you'll do differently tomorrow. Just sit with your breath. Breathe in gently. Breathe out slowly. Feel your body here. Feel that you're still alive, still have time, still have choice. There's nothing to prove right now. No one is scoring you. This moment doesn't demand strength. It only asks for presence. And when you leave this moment, carry 2 reminders, not as commands, but as quiet companions. Discomfort is my training ground. Each time you don't run, you forge steel, and I am becoming unshakable, day by day. Not through big leaps, but through small, repeated choices, made quietly. No one needs to see them. No applause is required. You just need to know, and that is enough.